If you're a developer, are you putting in effort to make sure the sites that you build are accessible? If you're not, I think now is a great time to start. Over 15% of the world's population are considered disabled, and they find it difficult to use sites that are not built with accessibility in mind. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to be talking about how to build your sites with accessibility in mind. We are going to be taking a look at what exactly is accessibility, the WCAG principles and what they are, and we'll also look at some ways and tools that you can actually start using to make your sites more accessible. Oftentimes, accessibility is neglected as part of the development process for building websites and applications. Sometimes it's always listed as the last thing that would be accomplished, or oftentimes it's always neglected, like it's not even considered. People just ship their projects without, fixing or making sure that the site is accessible to everybody, including those with disabilities. How do we as developers make sure that we're building better sites that are accessible to more people? In this video, I'm going to talk about why it's important to build with accessibility. Like I said, share some tips and tools that can help you build more accessible websites. I've been talking a lot about web accessibility already. It makes sense for me to actually explain or give you a definition of what web accessibility is. Web accessibility means that every single person, including those with disability, can navigate, perceive, understand and use websites, tools and services online without any difficulty. Now that we've covered what web accessibility means, I would like to introduce you to a concept called the WCAG guidelines or the WCAG principles. WCAG is a set of guidelines that are guiding the building of accessible websites on the web. So your guidelines that you should follow when you're considering building or when you're thinking of building your making your sites more accessible. There are 4, and I will explain each of them. The first one is that you should make sure that your site is perceivable. So making sure that people can actually make use of your site, understand the content that's on there. And it's very important for you to make sure that this is covered for your website. So making sure that your website is perceivable. The next one is operable, making sure that people can navigate through your website with their keyboard or your mouse. This is also very important. The third one is that you should make sure that the content on your site is understandable, making sure that the words that you use are clear and concise, and making sure that people can actually understand it, regardless of the language it's written in. And the final principle is to make sure that your site is robust. This means that you should make sure that the content on your site can be used in several different technologies, like assistive technologies, like making sure that I can use not just my mouse, not just my keyboard, I can also use like a screen reader to navigate through your site and understand it. These are the 4 core principles of the WCAG, and it's important that for your website, you should follow all of these principles. A lot of people that navigate through the websites or through the web every single day have one form of ability or disability. Now, we should always consider that people that are trying to access our sites might have certain difficulties, and making sure that you follow each of these guidelines is going to help make your site more accessible to these people. A lot of sites, when you check, a lot of sites are not very accessible. If you go on Google, search for a website and test it, because there are several tools that you can use to check if a site is accessible or not, you'd find out that a lot of sites are not currently accessible. And this is because of the reason I stated earlier, that people don't really pay attention to making sure that their site is accessible. This video is sponsored by Pluralsight. Pluralsight is a platform for developers that are looking to upskill or level up their knowledge in specific technologies. And because we're talking about accessibility in this video, Pluralsight has a lot of courses that you can take to up your skills in the accessibility area. I'll be linking some of them in the description, so make sure you check them out if you want to learn more about accessibility from seasoned authors. How do you know that a site is accessible? There are several different ways that you can check to make sure that you're actually following the guidelines. And this is all stated in the WCAG document. But I would like to share with you some of the things you should check for to make sure that your site is accessible. And by checking for these things, if they're not currently implemented in your sites, it's something that you can actually fix before going to production, or before deploying, or before pushing your site live. So the first one I would like to mention is that you should make sure that every single image on your site always has alternative text and alt text. The alt text means that whenever an image, maybe you are having internet issues or the page is taking so much time to load, there is always a descriptive text saying what the image is or describing the image in some way. It's always important that you should make sure that wherever you have an image on your website, it always has a descriptive text. Not just, a lot of times people just put in the alt tag image, or they just put picture, or they just put something that is not describing the alt. It's very important to always, add the description of the specific image that you're using. Another thing you should check for when you're trying to make your site more accessible is that you should make sure that every element on your page is keyboard accessible. Now, a lot of times people use the trackpad or their mouse to navigate through a website, but oftentimes some other people use keyboard, or they also use assistive technologies. And a lot of times when you don't prioritize accessibility, you find that some elements on your page cannot be accessed through all these several devices that I mentioned, like the keyboard, using the tab key. So if you're using it, if you're testing or you're trying to make sure that your site is accessible, make sure you test with the tab key. Like, just go through every single page on your website and go through the tab key. Use the tab key to navigate and make sure that you are hitting every single part of your page and you're not going to get stuck at any point. Every time that you find that, for instance, you're on a drop down menu and you navigate through that with your keyboard and your keyboard doesn't go through that, there are things that you can actually do to make sure that your keyboard goes through that, using tab index. Another example is making sure that you use semantic HTML when you're writing your code, when you're building your site, making sure that you convey meaning through the elements that you're using. So if you find that you're using a section, instead of making everything a div, right, use semantic HTML instead. Using elements like article, section, aside, instead of div every time would give your content more, your semantic HTML more meaning than just using div every single time. Another thing that I found, that when people try to make buttons, you can actually use the HTML like that has been given to you, because this all already comes with accessible features, right? But people would go on to use a div for a button when you can literally just use a button element. So considering things like that is very, very important. Another thing I would like to mention is, if you're adding media content to your website, make sure that they have captions or they are transcribed. They have transcription, because some people might be hard of hearing and they want to watch your video that you have on your website, but they can't because they don't hear. So it's nice to have subtitles in your videos. When you have a form, it's always important to associate a label to every input in your form. So if you have a form with your name, email address, and the rest, make sure that you associate a label with the description of what the form should include, of what the input should include in all your forms on your website. This is another important thing to do to make sure that your site is more accessible. Another thing to take note of is that color contrast is very important. Like, if you notice that your colors are not as visible, like the contrast are not aligned when you're for text or images or backgrounds that you have on your website, make sure that all colors are meeting the color contrast of at least AA or AAA. And this can also be checked with, right now, the Chrome browser. This is a new feature in Chrome whereby if you inspect an element and you highlight on it, you can see if it's meeting the appropriate color contrast. So making sure that the colors you have on your site for text, images, are all using proper color contrast to make sure that they are more visible so people can understand what those texts are. I would also like to share with you some tools that you can use to test for accessibility or just check to make sure your apps or your website that you're building is accessible. Now let's cover some tools that can be helpful for you when checking for accessibility or when making sure that your site is accessible. These are some of the tools that I personally have given a try. I have also found some new ones that are very helpful for me, which I'll be sharing with you as well. The first one that I always use every single time is Lighthouse. Lighthouse is part of the Chrome browser. Basically, you can, even when you're on development mode or when your site is already published, you can use the Lighthouse auditing on your Chrome browser, or you go to web.dev and check your website to make sure that it's accessible. When you run an audit for your website, you get some results back. So it tells you how many percentage, how much of your site is not accessible. So if you don't have the proper image alt tags, it tells you that, so you can quickly fix those things. Another tool that I've been liking of recent is a color picker tool plus a color contrast tool called SIP. It's actually paid, but I use it, and when I'm using it, I use it to find colors, of course, because it's a color picker. But an additional feature that it has is it also allows you to check color contrast. So you can check the color contrast on your pages and make sure that they're actually meeting the standards. Another tool is Axe. So Axe is one of the most popular accessibility tools out there. It's also in the browser, so you can download it as a Chrome extension and use it to audit and test your app when you're building it out. It also has a CLI tool that you can also install in your project to also run accessibility tests. And finally, another tool you should consider using is Cypress. So if you're running tests in your application or your website, also writing tests that covers accessibility, so checking if a color has proper contrast or checking if an image has all the alternative text that it should have. So this can also be part of your testing pipeline, so you catch these things before you actually deploy your website to production. These are just some of the tools that can help you check for and audit your apps to make sure they are meeting the accessibility standards. In the description, I'm going to also link some more tools that I did not mention in this video that are very helpful for you. Make sure you check that out. Well, thank you so much. I really liked that I was able to share what accessibility is and the importance of accessibility with you. If you watched till this point of this video, I hope that I've been able to share with you some reasons why building our apps to make sure that it's accessible to more people is relevant, and we should start cultivating the habit to build more accessible apps. Even if you don't want to do it, I think there are laws backing accessibility in some countries whereby if they find that your app is not meeting some standards, you can get a lawsuit for that. So I think accessibility is very important. What's even important is showing empathy to people that are using your site. So regardless of their ability or their disability, making sure that they can navigate and use your site is very important. Thank you so much. I hope you learned something from this video. Don't forget to check out the Pluralsight course that I linked in the description if you want to learn more in depth about accessibility from seasoned authors on Pluralsight. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in my next video.